All right, just gonna do a time check here. Let me hide all my things. Hide that, hide that. I have the attention span of a goldfish, so I have to make
Yeah.
sure that there's nothing on the screen. Otherwise, I'll be staring at a off into a Spotify playlist, being like, "Oh, those are good songs."
Yeah.
All right, ready to roll?
Yeah. Good to go.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart, and today I'm joined by Jay Moolenaar. He's the founder and CEO over at Sentient, and we're going to talk about product market fit. Before we jump in, this episode is brought to you by Predictable Revenue's founder coaching services. Founders, let's be real, scaling a company is tough. You're juggling product, revenue, hiring, and a million other decisions. But what if you had a proven framework and expert guidance to help you navigate through the chaos? That's where our Predictable Revenue founder coaching program comes in. Whether you're trying to find your first customers or fine tuning your go to market strategy, we can help you build a business that's predictable. Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Now to the episode. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Colin. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to learning about Sentient and where the idea came from, because this sounds like scratch my own itch problem. So tell me about it.
Yeah, totally. It came from I've been in the sales space for 20 plus years, at half of which kind of a large company, and then the other half at small startups. And really, this came as something I saw over and over again when I was at small startups. And the problem was we would have inbound leads. Our marketing team would actually do a good job driving traffic to our website. We convert some of that website into a contact form. And then
Mhm.
when they actually filled out the contact form, we wouldn't respond very quickly. And so, even with an SDR team, even with all the people, and we weren't huge operations or 24 kind of five operations. So there would be a lag there. And when I say a lag, I would say 30 minutes to maybe 8 hours.
Mhm.
And it became a recurring problem. And I just said, I'm just going to solve that problem for myself and put my money where my mouth is and build this solution that just basically responds in 5 seconds or less to any contact form completion via phone call, text message, or web chat, depending on what the end user who fills out the contact form chooses as their medium of communication.
Pretty cool. And so you had this idea from what you'd seen with startups. I'm curious, how did you go about deciding that, hey, this is the thing that I want to dedicate 100% of my time to?
When I came up with the idea, I was really just trying to brainstorm what do I know a lot about, like I have a good understanding of, and what are the kind of problems that I'm seeing every day that could be solved and that have a reasonably high value, right?
Hmm.
When I'm working at startups, we're doing deals. Our average deal size, most startups I worked at were $250,000 a year. So you miss one of those deals, it's a big issue. And you miss one a month, it becomes even bigger issue, right? So there was some value in solving that problem. And I had a fair bit of knowledge about it, not only from the just the side of the sales world and the structure of sales and where the kind of gaps were and how kind of like that marketing team works with the sales team, right? Because marketing is the one who's super excited when a lead comes in and a contact form is completed, and sales is too, but then there's that kind of that bridge is not built in a lot of
Hmm.
organizations with technology. There's that gap, and really that gap is time. And I that's how I define that, as I saw that time lag as being the issue, that we couldn't convert that very quickly. And I said, let's just do that because I think there's value there and I know how to solve it. And then I've been around AI and machine learning startups for a long time, so I got to understand how all the tech worked together. I'm not a coder, but could come up with the general framework of what I wanted the solution to look like. So that's how I came about getting to this place.
Right on. And then how did you, so when you put it all together, how did you find your first customers? What was the next step once you made the decision? What came next?
Yeah, so I tested with a couple friends who have either they're solopreneurs or small startups and things like that, and it worked for them.
Mhm.
And then I really started out with a structure that said, I'm going to go after small players, easy ones to implement, because I've worked in really complex sales,
Mhm.
large enterprises, and I know that implementation is key, right? Because if you can't implement, you can't train and get adoption, and then you lose and then you fail. So I
Mhm.
figured I'd start very small, not worrying about so much revenue, but focused on getting the kinks worked out a little bit, meaning
Mhm.
like I can go to a small individual or small shop, get this implemented, have them see some success, and they're a little more lenient when it comes to issues. So that's kind of how I started. And then when I got, 20 of those up and running, I had a lot of feedback in terms of just where the challenges were, what I needed to do in terms of implementation and training. I thought
Mhm.
given how easy the solution is to use, that people would just do it themselves.
Yeah.
Learn very quickly they don't. And I've kind of learned that over the years that very few people want a solution that they have to figure out on their own. So they really want a lot
Yeah.
of support and customer service. So that's a key thing to work through before you start to scale, in my personal opinion. So I was able to work through that, get like those commonly asked, frequently asked questions and a list of those so that you could almost tackle those ahead of them, someone even asking you and be like, yep, I know how to do that. I know the solution there. So building that
Mhm.
framework across really small companies and then just stair stepping up as you go, right? Go to a little bit bigger organization and see what the challenges are and see what the questions are. And then you get into where do I need to integrate with? What enhancements are they looking for? Things like that. So that's my strategy around that.
I really like that you started small. I think to your point, when you're trying to nail your first couple of customers, an 18-month enterprise sales cycle is going to murder you. It's
You
not
can't do
something
it.
that's possible.
And
As the somebody who's been the first sales guy for a number of startups, including three of my own, it's really nice to be able to get some velocity going. And typically when I'm working with new startups and they're trying to say, okay, we want to sell enterprise. I'm like, let's start small because we want to optimize for getting as many at bats as we possibly can in those first couple of months because you want to get people using it, get their feedback, make the software a little bit better. But it's always a balance of I want these big enterprise deals or medium-sized enterprise deals. This business doesn't scale on $100 a month or $1,000 a month. How did you balance that? And did you start small and were you able to work back up or I'd love to understand your thoughts there.
yeah, and I think that I'll say number one, yeah, I totally think that unless you have a very strong product, you can't go big because large organizations also know that if they're seasoned veterans in the space in technology or IT or whatever, they know the challenge is implementation, right? And they have to get through security. If you're at a regulated industry or you're at some big organization, you have to get through all their security protocols or cyber stuff. Their team's going to vet the company and make sure that they're going to have the resources to continue as an operation before they're going to move forward. It's a really bad idea, in my opinion, unless you have a very strong product to try to go big first. And
Mhm.
the goal here is, again, I always think personally that the goal initially is not revenue. The goal initially is to get in the hands of people, get them to play around with it, find the bugs, find the problems, and you figure out your playbooks as you're doing that and then grow from there. And I think also that it is hard from a revenue perspective because everyone wants to say, oh, I want to be selling $500,000 deals right off the bat. And I know that companies need that revenue to sustain their growth and things like that and probably satisfy some of their investors' expectations and things like that. But
And every investor says go sell more. So, and I do think it is one of the maybe not myths, but maybe the worst understood advice in tech. Go
totally.
sell more. It is both true and false. Because
Yeah.
I think what you were saying is the revenue isn't as important as what you learn from that revenue. I don't care if it's 12 grand or like 10 customers at $100 a month is going to be meaningless in 5 years. But
Yeah.
having 10 customers now enables you to learn enough to get to that $1 million mark in a year or two. And
I totally agree with that. And that's just my experience, and particularly with a lot of startups, right? A lot of startups that I worked for before doing this, we weren't selling multi-million dollar deals day one. They were doing 25,
no,
$35,000 deals at trying to sell an enterprise solution. So you have to get that learning down first. And then you really got to streamline your operations because once you tackle a big enterprise customer, you got to
Mhm.
have your ducks in a row to be able to be successful. Otherwise, you are putting out fires every single day and your organization is running around with people with their hair on fire every day.
Yeah.
So you got to move, you
Um,
have to be careful with that.
I want to double click on this because how do you think about your MVP? I like to think about pricing in terms of I want to be charging something for the software right away. Nobody gets to use it for free unless they're just like it's a proof of concept. Just make sure the software actually works. And so maybe the first five people get to try it for free, but everybody's got to pay for it
Mhm.
eventually. And eventually being like the first month. I talked to a lot of startups who are like, oh, I want to sell this for 25, 30, 50 grand, which is great. But if you don't have 10 customers yet, it's very challenging to get to ask for 35, 40, 50, 100 grand from a company and have the believability behind you. I'm a bigger fan of let's start with a 5% of what the product's going to be worth and then milestone it out from there. I'm curious your take. How do you approach that?
Yeah.
How did you approach your MVP pricing? Did you charge for it? Did you not charge for it?
Yeah, I had a couple free users, and really what the initial strategy was to go down the credit-based model, so usage-based. And so that made it pretty easy for people to just say, I'll commit $100 and just try it out and see how it goes. And then if it works, great, I'll continue to pay. And then if I don't, I've spent $100, I get a little bit of revenue, right? I get a little bit of skin in the game from the customer to try to want to make this successful because you get something away for free all the time. Nobody really has any skin in the game. It's not a top priority. It's
Mhm.
something that, oh, I'll get to it down the road, then you never get that feedback. But if you have somebody who is at least willing to put their credit card down and say, I'll pay you $100 just to try this out for a month or two, or for some credits, and I can use those credits. I think that's a great strategy. It gets them to kind of stay top of mind on your solution and
Mhm.
make sure that they're giving you the feedback, they're giving you access to them. And you can do it in a couple different ways. Yeah, you could do like a minimal fee for 1 to 3 months and just
Mhm.
initially and just say you're not going to count that as ARR, but you're going to just at least have some revenue. You're going to have somebody who has their skin in the game, whether they're paying you $1,000 or $500 or whatever, and you get far more value out of them than the $500 is. You get a lot of conversations, questions,
Mhm.
suggestions, things like that that I think is just invaluable in the early days of trying to build something.
Totally. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Or I just had an interesting thought that if you're, say you wanted to charge $1,000 a month, but you're only charging $100 a month, you're still capturing more than $1,000 a month because you're benefiting from that learning, and which is going to be worth way more than what you're saving or the discount that you're giving the customer.
By all means, I think you can use that down the road, right? For all the next implementations. And then you're slowly, the next one's $200, the next one's $500, and then it's 1,000. Then you're at your actual desired monthly
Mhm.
revenue, charging price or whatever it is. And so you get there very quickly, but then things are smooth when you're actually charging that full boat kind of price.
Totally. But you've had the opportunity to learn while it's discounted. I hate saying the word as a salesperson.
But it's just the way to do it, in my opinion. And I think that's what I've seen a lot of other companies that are successful, how they do it as well. And then you don't run into issues on overcharging somebody, and then they get really upset, and then they're not they become like an opponent of yours. They become someone who's like a negative person in the marketplace that may potentially spewing out some negative information about you, and that's not good.
Totally. You want to keep that flywheel turning and keep it positive.
Definitely.
So coming back to Sentient, your first customers came from some friends of yours from previous startups and experience and your network. Where did the next customers actually, you know what? Before I ask the next customer question, how many of those continued using it? How many of those turned into referred you other customers?
Yeah, fair bit. I'd probably say 2/3 to 75% of them became customers and or refer me to other groups. And I've started to partner with some of those guys too, who have maybe like tangential solutions or in other incubators, things like that with their startups. So it's been
Mhm.
a positive experience thus far in terms of that. So I think it's when you're picking your first potential customers that you're giving away for free, I'd say choose wisely. I think
Mhm.
there's some people out there that they're friends of yours or they're good ex-colleagues or something, and they have additional network on top of what you might have. They might have a complementary network of people that they can then refer out your product to as they see success. So again, you might not be charging them any money, getting revenue, but you're getting the feedback, you're getting their network, you're getting their potential ability to be a referring partner, and also just giving you potentially the ability to be a referenceable customer too, whether it's they do a quick video for you or they are happy to jump on the phone with a potential customer as you grow, things like that. So choose wisely, and but it's a very positive experience, I found at least.
Love it. I think the biggest signal, the biggest positive signal I like to see is people keep using the software and then they refer a friend. And
Mhm.
once you're getting that referral as a salesperson, there's nothing better than a referral. It's going to close at a much higher rate because the social proof is there. Somebody's already using it. They say, "Hey, I use this and it's great. You should try it too." I think the nothing better. So first customers came from network, second customers came from referrals from your first customers. Where did your first kind of major channel come from? Something that was predictable, or at
Yeah, I
least,
was, yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
That's a great question. And I think what I was doing was I initially went after the B2B tech space, smaller B2B tech companies. This is the problem that this was born out of. And the market had been tough during kind of post-COVID. We had that big spike and then we had a downturn. So It wasn't the best area for me to go into. It's hard for a VP of marketing or someone to say, yes, I want to spend money on a solution that qualifies inbound leads when we're
Hmm.
not getting any at this time. So
Yeah.
pivoted out and I really started to talk to a lot of people, just people that I knew on my network. Hey, just want to get your feedback on this. Don't not expecting you to be a customer, not trying to tell you this. Just want to think, this is what I have. What do you think of this? Is this something that would work in your industry or another industry you understand? And through
Hmm.
those conversations, I kept getting a couple different industries that were interesting. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go after them. And I just did it through like social media. So LinkedIn, use another tool called Alignable,
Hmm.
which is a small business version of LinkedIn. And so
Okay.
starting to get into some other industries through those two channels and getting some conversations together and just starting to open up some doors. And then people were pretty responsive in these certain industries. And I started to just niche down and pinpoint into one and just said, I'm just going to go for a couple months after this industry and try to have as many conversations as I could. And it worked out. And I started to close at a more predictable kind of rate, I could say. Honestly, the last time I calculated, when I was getting on the phone with people, if I could get a meeting, get on the call with them, and my precursor to the meeting was, this is what I'm selling, right? And I expect
Hmm.
this is going to be a sales call. This isn't just like I'm trying to hoodwink you into getting on the phone with me. I'm going to try to sell you. I was just kind of having a pretty direct messaging conversation with them. My close rate got to 87% when I was getting on these calls. And just
Hmm.
because I don't have to charge a ton of money, I'm not looking to go after massive 100,000 plus dollar deals at this point. It's a fairly well priced solution. I run a very lean organization. I'm the only full-time employee. So costs can be low. So people can see value very quickly. But yeah, I think that's really the goal is you got to have some conversations. If you think your initial idea doesn't work out, I would quit. I would start to try to figure out where are some other avenues that I can go just to elicit feedback from people who have expertise in other industries that you may not have been in before. And then
Hmm.
start that process, have some conversations. And then once you hear some kind of similar ideas coming through from different people who aren't, connected or didn't have a conversation beforehand, you're like, oh, maybe I'll try that out. And then just
Hmm.
start going after people through these wonderful social media and business networking tools out there. So it makes it pretty easy.
I love that. I love that you built something for the initial market and then that market. I don't love that it fell apart. It fell apart for all of us and we sell pretty heavily into that as well. And so it was an interesting time. What I love is that you went back to the validation step and said, okay, I've got this thing. Let's go see who else would find value out of this. And you found some very interesting kind of verticals and sub verticals for you to focus your time and attention on. And so the moment was the, finding a particular vertical and then hearing consistency and the problems and pains that you were able to solve from a very similar ideal customer profile. Am I on the right track there?
No, exactly. Yeah. And then you can use that as just reaffirming the next conversation. Oh, do you have anybody else in this said industry? And you're like, yeah, I've got 25 people now using it. And they're like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then the next conversation is, oh, I've got 30 people. And so it's starting to grow. And they're like, oh, okay. But if you're like, there's one person in this industry
Hmm.
now, it's less compelling, right? So it's good to have that
Hmm.
kind of backup. And I always do believe in kind of what they call niching down, right, into specific areas. You can have that repeatable kind of process built out. And you
Yeah.
also get used to the questions that they're asking, and you get to learn the nuances of that specific industry and the challenges. And sometimes you can start to think about the subcategories of it, right? Like where the specific pain is recurring in a specific person's kind of what they're specifically doing in that industry is. Now I can even niche down more and go back after that area where I know there's a lot of pain versus maybe there's certain other aspects of that industry where someone's doing something slightly different. There isn't
Hmm.
that. Like I'm just wasting my time.
And it's so hard because when you're niching down, and I do this all the time because I'll help founders. One of the first things when we're trying to figure out, okay, what is the strategy for what channels will work for you? I would want to look at what the market size is, right? And so what's the total size of the market? And then what's the size of the market that we want to start with? And they're like, oh no, I don't want to, I want to keep it broad. I want to keep it open. And it's like, don't worry, like we can get to that later. But what we need to start with is the people that are most likely to respond and say yes today. It
Yep.
doesn't mean you'll never talk to these folks ever again, but I feel like that's the instant reaction of, no, I want to keep my TAM this big. And I understand why. But did you feel that at all? When you're like, oh, you got to fight
Yeah.
the balance of, I don't want to niche down to one company and only one company finds this relevant.
Yeah, no, and I think that's an interesting topic, right? And it's definitely, yeah, you want to sell as much as possible to as many people as possible. But I think that's unrealistic a lot of times until you've really tackled, again, is your product ready for prime time? Is your product ready to be everything to everybody? And that takes a long time to get to that point. So niching down and doubling and tripling down where you have success just allows you to have those repeatable conversations. And I think also just from the revenue growth perspective, you can do very well in small industries, particularly if you can just go dominate that industry and just be the person that's known in that industry, because then you start getting, and I haven't gotten this yet, but I've seen it before. Other startups have been at, like, where you just get the word of mouth recurring, like all of a sudden you're just getting all of these people, they're telling their friends, and you just get into this world of very,
Everybody knows you.
yeah, everybody knows you. And then it's
Mhm.
okay to pivot out of that, or not pivot out, but to expand out on that and go someplace else and do the same thing and just repeat that around all these industries that you feel like you can tackle. But you can't, in my opinion, you can't be everything to everybody unless you have just a product that solves the problem that so many people have that's just industry agnostic, right? I look at
Yeah,
like a cursor like tool, right? Like a code generation tool. Like that's industry agnostic, right? But it's just like you're just selling to a person who's like writing code who wants to use a tool that maybe can expedite some of the code writing and I can just go back in and fix the issues of it. But when you really
true.
stuff, it's rare that you find that, in my opinion.
I think that's one way to look at it. Absolutely, Cursor is a very broad tool. Same with Windsurf, very similar tool. I used Cursor. I switched to Windsurf. I think you could argue that yes, while it is broad, they have a very specific niche, which is idiots like myself that don't know how to code that want to code. Right. So I don't know if they would exactly describe it that in that way, but I don't know if they're necessarily targeting. Maybe Cursors may be targeting engineers more broadly, but I suspect they have some like very specific stacks they're very good at, and like they're probably not targeting folks that are doing like deep back end system level work.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's just more of the way I've seen people who are strong coders just use it as a way to expedite building out something small that's like very defined that it can handle. I just use that as, I think people think about there's just like a software engineer layer across the world that is just writing code. But it's a good point. I think they even have a target market. And I'll say something else that I learned a long time ago. It's very valuable, in my opinion, to make, and I don't want to come off the wrong way, people who aren't that smart smarter, right? Like I'm not
Mhm.
a coder, but I can use Cursor to knock out a bunch of stuff pretty quickly
Mhm.
that is, very basic, but I all of a sudden seem very smart and feel very smart. But it's not going to help the top tier engineer really get much better at coding. It might help them expedite some little nuanced things, but
Mhm.
that's a valuable place to be, or making people that aren't great in something really good at it in their mind.
100%. My parents were asking me about AI and that, and I was describing to them using Windsurf. And I was like, it's like I can swing a hammer. If I'm building a house, Windsurf gives me the ability to like swing a hammer, use a saw, and put a few things together. But I guarantee you wouldn't want to live in this house.
Yeah.
At least you wouldn't want to be in there when an earthquake happens. It might look great on the outside, but the inside is going to be a dumpster fire.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
Yeah. So we talked about where the first customers came from, where your next customers came from. I'd love to understand what was that moment where you realized, I think I've got product market fit. What did that feel like? What did it sound like?
Yeah, I think having a sales background, I tend to have a fairly structured conversation with people. And it is a conversation, not like just asking a bunch of questions. But when you get to that point in your conversation where you're like, you get the basics of what's going on in their world, what are some of the challenges, and then you maybe pitch the solution, right? A little bit in that conversation. Say, this is what I have. Does it sound like it could be interesting for you or not? And when you start to hear yes from people that you've never met before, and this is the first Zoom call that I'm on with them, and then you start to be like, okay, maybe I have some product market fit here, and then you have it again and then again, and then you're like, okay, this is I'm getting reoccurring yeses now. I might be onto something, so let's figure out how do I juice this up a little bit, and how can I get more conversations going? Because I'm not at like a PLG strategy. I wish I could be just at a PLG strategy, but it takes a little hand holding, it takes a little conversation and explanations and things like that. But that's where the next step is now, right? So the moment was really like I just saw like I was just having a number of yeses happening when I'm on calls with people, and now it's really about kind of like juice this up a little bit more. There's a couple different angles to take on that and which one is most going to be most effective for the solution.
I love it. I think it was Mark Roberge's idea, but he talked about product market fit is finding the gap in the market and being able to solve the gap. And then go to market fit is being able to define precisely who experiences the gap the greatest and then what they need in order to solve it and like what you need to know and the stories and the targeting and that kind of consistency so that you can get to that moment where you're at.
And it's interesting because there are other people solving this problem in similar and not similar ways, right? So it's really
Mhm.
finding the people that don't have there's certain stacks out there that I would probably stay away from at this point and be like, if they have that stack, they probably have a way to figure it out, or they have that kind of sales organizational structure in place and they're this big. It's probably not going to be a problem that they're really going to see as an issue. But I'm trying to, I'm working, and I've got pretty far along on it now, but working on building those aspects. Like, what is the exact like ICP of this that really is going to be the one that solves that needs the solution, and it's the structure of the organization, the technology they use in place, like what industry or industries are they in, right? Like how fragmented is this industry? How many tech players are in this? How knowledgeable are they of technology solutions and AI and things like that? What's like the average age of the person involved in this industry is a big one too, because you find that kind of certain age groups tend to be the demographics tend to be adopters, whereas some are like
Mhm.
builders. Like some people are like 22 and I'm just starting out in this industry. But dude, I was a computer science major, even though I'm doing this now, like I can go and whip something up for myself that I think would be just perfect for what I need to do. But you find someone like me, I'm 47 years old and I was in the computer age, but my early days of computers were like playing the Oregon Trail at the like
Yeah.
most basic
Yeah.
visualizations and graphics and things like that you could ever imagine. But I
Mm.
grew up in the PC world, and then there's the folks that kind of missed that. They didn't have access to PCs or anything until they were probably late in high school or in college. So there's you got to
Mm.
figure that stuff out too. And I think it was like Lululemon or somebody who was like, when they're selling their stretch pants, they're like, if I can make the 37-year-old woman who's at this kind of income level, this all these aspects of their ideal customer, if I can make
Mhm.
this individual happy, and they were super specific on who it was, I'll
Mhm.
get other people around that age group too that will adopt it. And
Yeah.
I want to make that specific person happy. So it's amazing when you really dig into ICP how specific it can be. I see a lot of companies that I've worked with in the past, they have very generic ICPs, very like this encompasses way too much variability in terms of our way of
Mhm.
speaking to somebody, the questions we would ask, the conversation we have. It's very hard to niche down, get very specific, get to that age cohort or specific age, get to that technological sophistication level that you want. What's their tech stack? What's the region they're in? That plays a huge part in what I'm doing because I see it. Certain regions of the country, people are much more receptive than others. It just is the way
Mhm.
what products are they selling within that specific industry can be a thing. So it's very specific, very specific.
Totally. Yeah, I love I can't remember the precise quote, but along the lines of when you're trying to speak to everybody, you're not speaking to anybody.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I remember one of my marketing advisors or mentors shared that with me in the early days, and it always stuck. That, of course, niche is just having a very specific conversation with a very specific set of folks so that you increase your likelihood of what you're saying resonating with them and that you're focusing your efforts on those where your value prop resonates the most.
No, definitely. So it's been fun. It's been interesting. And I think it's a nice problem to have now, right? To try to get to that next level, but it takes a lot of work and it's just a pivot away from what you were talking about right now. It's like the go to market versus all the other stuff. And so it's interesting.
Yeah. Talk to me about what comes next for Sentient.
That's the real goal here is to, yeah, scale up a little bit more. What's the strategy around scaling up and the, what's the pathway to doing that? When I look at, is it building partnerships with people who have the ability and access to my ideal customer? Is it like more of a direct marketing kind of strategy that targets these individual people? Combined with potentially like a POG strategy, but POG strategies are tough. My product does require some work, but when you know how to do it, it's very easy. But if someone just we're opening it up and be like, what do I do now? Ancillary things and training materials and things you have to create and to scale up. So that might be off the table for the time being. But and then what are the mediums you want to talk to people on? Like is email going to work these days? It's hit or miss. It depends. What are the other? Is it conferences? Is it a combination of all these events? Is it just doing webinars and education? Because AI still is somewhat new to a lot of people, right? Everyone's like AI,
Mhm.
but everyone kind of knows ChatGPT now. We know about kind
Mhm.
of these LLMs that do stuff for us, like they can write me a paper if I'm in college, or they can write my email or help me wordsmith something, but there's so much more beyond that. And I think people are still trying to wrap their head around how do I implement this into my business and be
Mhm.
successful and not get, I guess I use the term hoodwinked again, right? Like I don't spend a ton of money on a bunch of stuff that doesn't add any value. And now I'm in a
Mhm.
worse place than I was before. So educating people on I try to educate people on like I'm a small piece in the puzzle. I'm a low
Mhm.
cost kind of solution that I'm not here to break your bank, but if you use this in conjunction with a couple other different strategies, you can be really successful. And we can help you with those other strategies, or you can do it on your own, whatever you want to do. So there's still a bit of education. So I guess that's a long answer to what's the next step, but it's tough, right? It's a big game that you got to figure out.
Totally. It's hard to figure out do I double down on this particular audience? And then I think one of the hardest pieces is figuring out, does this channel or does this audience respond on this channel? I've running experiments for a side project I'm working on, and we tried LinkedIn, zero results. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, was it that they don't use their LinkedIn, or do a lot of people use their LinkedIn and I got a terrible response rate? Knowing the difference between the two is pretty critical. Turns out they just don't use LinkedIn, the audience I was going after. They use
Yeah.
email very heavily. And the same thing with email. How do you know if everybody's responsive on email, but how do you know if you didn't do it right? How do you know that was a valid experiment or not? Is a tricky piece.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? Because we all think coming to the B2B tech world, like everyone's on LinkedIn all day long, right? It's becoming almost too much at this point. But there are people who are like, yeah, I have a LinkedIn account, maybe I have a couple hundred connections, but I don't go on that once a month. I might go in there and look around. So you do have to kind of test, particularly if you're pivoting out of what I had to do, pivot out of what I thought was going to be my target audience and pivoting away from that into other areas and figuring out like how do those people communicate and what social media applications do they use and where are they communicating the most, whether it's email, text message, phone, anything else. And so it's another interesting part of the game, right? It's like kind of it does makes it even harder when you're like, is it just a crappy email that I sent with a bad headline and they don't care, or
Mm-hmm.
something else? So it's tough. It takes some time. I think people have to have a little bit of patience sometimes.
100%. Yeah, I could double click on that and go forever. So I won't. But I strongly agree. Trying to figure out what channel people are responsive to is one of the most important things. And outbound can be an awful black box because the failure state is just zero.
Yeah.
There's nothing, it's hard to really learn from it. But I don't want to take an hour and go on a rant or ramble about outbound. I want you to tell me a little bit about Sentient because we haven't really talked about it. And so if people are curious, if they're listening, what does it do and where can they find more?
Yeah, great. No, thank you. And so Sentient really, again, born out of my own problem of being slow to respond to inbound leads and having to chase them for 2 weeks, only to hear that they've talked to two of my competitors and they're, going to try to POC with those guys first. If it doesn't work, we'll come back to you. Really, it's just looks like on a website, a regular contact form. And
Mhm.
what it does is after you put your information in there, it offers you the opportunity, says, do you want to open a chat now? Do you want to receive a text message or phone call now? And you have the option of which communication channel you want.
Mhm.
And from there, we'll contact you within 5 seconds or less. And in that communication, we'll ask you information gathering questions about what your problem is or what you're trying to solve for, something like that. And
Mhm.
we'll push for a call to action. And that call to action usually is going to be a meeting with the next person in the process. Usually it's a salesperson, right? And so really what we're trying to do is be that immediate response tool, going from the golden kind of time frame before was 5 minutes. Respond to all your inbound leads within 5 minutes or less. I'm saying I want to do it in 5 seconds or less. What really happens is from the psychological perspective of a buyer, right? It's a real problem when they're willing to go to your form. They've been on your website, they've been looking at your resources, they've been doing all this stuff. They're going to your contact form and they're willing to put in like their phone number or their email address, like information that they don't want to really give out as much as possible. And so
Hmm.
that's the time you want to capture them, right? It's not only are they willing to give up this information, but they're willing to give up more information. And so what I've learned over the years is that is when the problem is top of mind. That's when you want to ask them all the questions. That's when they're willing to answer
Hmm.
truthfully about what's going on. And if you wait an hour, they may be at a company where, hey, a whole fire drill is now happening. This is back burner
Hmm.
stuff. I'll pick this up in a week or something. And now I'm focused on this. And then you're chasing them, and then it's not really that big of a deal for the time being. And then they pick it up later and they're talking to your competitors. So I always find like I want to be there right at that moment. And that's what Sentient does. And I think having multiple communication channels allows people to communicate in the way that they want to. And it's been successful. And so we've been just helping people lower their customer acquisition costs because we're getting more leads that are converting into
Hmm.
meetings and hopefully then turning into sales, and just helping out organizations maximize their revenue opportunities because that's really what it's about, right? You spend a lot of money on marketing, you got a lot of people involved in marketing. Let's make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck in that process. So that's what I do. You can find me at our website is Sentient ST, so sentientsamtom.com. Check out the website, and if contact me via the website, just click the contact button. You'll get to a form, and you can fill out the form, and you'll go through the process, and hopefully we can chat at some point.
So not only will you be able to get in touch with Jay, you'll also be able to experience the product. That's a cool
Your
demo.
demo.
Yeah,
So
right to the magic
yeah,
moment.
exactly. So you can figure out right then and there if it's worth your time or not. So cool.
I love it. Jay, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey, sharing more about Sentient. I really enjoyed getting a chance to learn a little bit more about you and the journey.
Yeah, I had a great time, Colin. Thank you so much and appreciate you reaching out. And this has been really fun. Thanks for the time.
Right on. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll catch y'all next time.